Family, listen, because what I'm about to share is not just another message, not just another date on the calendar. January 23rd, 2026, mark it. Circle it, highlight it, because this is the day God began to whisper something powerful, something restorative, something meant for any soul that's ever felt behind, broken, or forgotten. And he said, I have 3 ways to restore your wasted years. You know what that means? Every moment you thought was lost, every season you believed was too late, every opportunity you assumed was gone for good, God is saying, I'm not done. I redeem, I restore, I rebuild. So today, I'm not here to hype you up with empty words. I'm here to deliver a message straight to the part of you that's been waiting for clarity, waiting for direction, waiting for permission to believe again. Because when God speaks about restoring wasted years, He's not just talking about time. He's talking about destiny. And today we're stepping into it. There are moments in life when the silence inside you becomes louder than the noise around you, when you look at the pieces of your past and wonder if they could ever become anything meaningful again. And on January 23rd, God speaks into that silence with a clarity that shakes the dust off forgotten dreams. When He says He restores wasted years by reviving what died inside you, He is not making a poetic statement. He is announcing a resurrection. There are things inside you that did not disappear because they were weak, but because life hit you harder than you expected. There were dreams that suffocated under responsibility, desires that drowned in disappointment, and visions that you buried because you assumed you no longer had the right to believe for them. But God looks at everything you thought was dead and whispers, I am not finished with you. I never was. Reviving what died inside you is not about going back in time. It is about reclaiming the part of you that time could not destroy. When God restores wasted years, He starts with the internal landscape before He ever touches the external circumstances. He begins with your confidence, your expectation, your courage, your fire. Because the truth is, the greatest losses in life are rarely material, they are internal. The years you call wasted are not defined by a calendar. They are defined by the moments when something in you stopped breathing. The day you stopped believing you were capable. The day you stopped expecting good things. The day you stopped praying because you convinced yourself nothing would change. The day you stopped showing up with passion because passion felt useless. But this is the day God reaches into the parts of you that have been sleeping, waiting, hiding, and He speaks revival over them. When God revives what died inside you, He does not start gently. He starts with a shaking that disrupts your numbness, a shaking that awakens your sensitivity, a shaking that forces you to confront the truth that you were created for more than survival. You were created for meaning. You were created for impact. You were created to build, to rise, to hope, to move, to believe again. And sometimes revival doesn't feel like a warm flame. It feels like heat that is uncomfortable because the things that died inside you did not die quietly. They died. Disappointment, betrayal, failure, fatigue. And reviving them means you must let God touch the places where you still feel fragile. But this day is not about fragility. It is about strength. Returning to places where you only remember weakness. It is about vision, returning to eyes that forgot how to imagine. It is about passion, returning to a heart that forgot how to burn. When God restores wasted years by reviving what died inside you, He does it with intention. He does not revive everything. He revives the right things. He revives the dreams that still align with your destiny, the gifts that were planted in you before you were born, the passions that kept calling your name even when you ignored them. He revives the motivation that once pushed you to grow, to learn, to stretch beyond who you used to be. But you must understand something. Revival begins when you stop calling dead what God still calls possible. You may have pronounced a funeral over your hope, your purpose, your creativity, your joy, your strength. You may have accepted the idea that those parts of you were seasonal, temporary, naive. But God refuses to accept that verdict. He looks at what you buried and says, get up. Get up from the disappointment. Get up from the heartbreak. Get up from the shame. Get up from the season that convinced you nothing good could come from you again. Get up from the fear that settled into your bones like winter, that overstayed its welcome. Because revival is not an emotional park. It is the moment you choose to believe that God can breathe again into what you thought was beyond recovery. And when God revives something inside you, it does not rise slowly, it rises with force. It rises in a way that surprises even you. You wake up one morning with clarity you haven't felt in years. You feel hunger again, not physical hunger, but soul hunger, desire for more, desire for meaning, desire for movement. You feel vision stirring like a river underneath the surface. You feel momentum building in places that were stagnant. You may not be able to explain it, but suddenly you feel alive again. You feel possibility again. You feel like the future is no longer a threat, but an invitation. But revival also requires a decision. God can breathe, but you must respond. He can call, but you must answer. He can awaken, but you must rise. Revival inside you becomes restoration around you when you begin to move like someone who has something worth fighting for. You may not have seen progress yet, but something in you knows change has already begun. Something in you knows that the fire is not imagined. Something in you knows that what God revived is real and it is stronger than anything that tried to bury it. What died inside you did not die because you were weak. It died because life had storms you did not see coming. But storms do not stop seeds, they bury them. And buried things grow. God is not reviving a fragile part of you. He is reviving a stronger version of it. He is reviving a wiser dream, a matured purpose, a refined passion. He is reviving confidence that does not depend on applause, faith that does not depend on feelings, hope that does not depend on circumstances. The revival God brings to your inner word is meant to make you unshakable somehow. What died inside you died because you gave too much of yourself to the wrong people. You invested in people who did not know how to value loyalty. You trusted people who were not capable of protecting your heart. You poured energy into people who never intended to pour back. And over time, disappointment became a slow leak, draining you of your enthusiasm, your focus, your generosity. But God restores wasted years by reviving the part of you that knows how to love without losing yourself. Give without emptying yourself. Hope without hurting yourself. He revives healthy passion, healthy trust, healthy intention. Some of what died inside you died because of fear. Fear of failing again. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of being wrong again. Fear of being seen trying. Fear of being disappointed by your own expectations. Fear can suffocate potential slowly and silently, but revival comes with courage, not loud, flashy courage, but the steady courage that whispers, try again. Courage that pushes you to take a step when standing still feels safer. Courage that tells you the pain of staying the same is greater than the risk of change. Some of what died inside you died because you experienced loss of relationships, loss of time, loss of stability, loss of identity, and loss has a way of shrinking your world until all you see is what you no longer have. But revival is the expansion of your soul. It is the moment God widens your vision again and reminds you that you are not defined by what you lost. You are defined by what He is able to restore. When God revives what died inside you, He does not bring it back the way it was. He upgrades it. He breathes strength into the cracks, wisdom into the wounds, clarity into the confusion. The revived version of you is not desperate, it is disciplined. Not restless, but ready. Not fragile, but fortified. Not unsure, but steady. And this change does not come from motivation. It comes from God's breath touching the deepest part of you. Revival becomes real when you begin to see yourself differently. When you stop seeing yourself through the lens of wasted years and start seeing yourself through the lens of restored purpose. When you stop seeing yourself as someone who lost and start seeing yourself as someone who can rise. Revival is not about feeling inspired for a moment. It is about believing a new identity. It is about stepping into a version of yourself that you always sensed existed but never fully embraced. When what died inside you comes back to life, you begin to speak differently. You speak with authority instead of apology. You speak with expectation instead of hesitation. You speak with conviction instead of insecurity. Your voice changes because your spirit changes. Your decisions change because your perspective changes. Your behavior changes because your belief changes. And as revival grows inside you, You begin to feel a pull toward what you once walked away from, not because you are going back, but because you are going forward with a restored version of what you lost. You begin to see paths again, paths you thought were closed, paths you thought were impossible, paths you thought were beyond your reach. Revival inside you becomes momentum around you. You begin to attract opportunities you thought you had missed, relationships that align with your calling, clarity that replaces confusion. Reviving what died inside you is God's way of preparing you for the restoration that is coming next. He is not giving you back the years. He is giving you back the version of yourself who can steward the years that are ahead. He is getting you back energy, back passion, back fire, back hunger, back hope, back desire, back movement, back confidence, back expectation, back boldness. He is giving you back the ability to feel alive again. And as this revival continues, you begin to realize that wasted years were not wasted at all. They were classrooms. They were preparation. They were soil for growth. They were the place where roots were planted. They were the seasons where character was shaped, vision was purified, and strength was developed. The revival happening inside you is not random. It is the R. Exulta everything you went through, everything you survived, everything that tried to break you but could. T. And now, as God breathes life into what died inside you, you feel something rising that you cannot suppress. You feel creativity waking up. You feel resilience waking up. You feel purpose waking up. You feel faith waking up. You feel the real you waking up. The you that never gave up. The you that always knew there was more. The you that refused to let failure be the final chapter. The you that still believes God can do something unexpected, something extraordinary, something impossible. And on this day, January 23rd, as God says He is, restoring wasted years by reviving what died inside you. You stand in the middle of a divine moment where resurrection is happening not around you but within you. Something ancient and something new are coming alive at the same time. Something you lost and something you never knew you had. Something familiar and something unfamiliar. Something humble and something powerful. The revival inside you is the sign that restoration has begun. There comes a moment when you look at your life and realize you've drifted farther than you ever intended to go. Not because you were rebellious, but because life has a way of pulling you into currents you never meant to follow. You don't wake up one day and choose distance. Distance happens slowly, subtly, silently. It happens through distractions, disappointments, delays, and detours. And on January 23rd, when God says He restores wasted years by realigning you with the purpose you drifted from, He is announcing a divine correction to the quiet drift that stole your direction. Realignment is not punishment. It is placement. It is God positioning you back into the flow of what you were designed to carry, back into the path where your calling makes sense, back into the story He has been writing long before you begin to understand it. Purpose is not something you find. It is something you return to. It is the place inside you where your passion, your gifts, your convictions, and your identity all recognize one another. But drifting from purpose doesn't always feel like rebellion. Sometimes drifting happens because you were trying to survive. Sometimes it happens because you were trying to please people. Sometimes it happens because you were trying to avoid pain. Sometimes it happens because you were trying to fit into roles that were never built for your spirit. You can be working, serving, building, appearing successful on the outside while slowly drifting from the reason you were created on the inside. Purpose doesn't disappear just because you stop listening to it. It waits. It waits for the moment God gently or forcefully pulls you back into alignment. Realignment is God's way of saying, I have more for you than what you settled for. Because drifting always leads to settling. You settle for routines that do not nourish you, environments that do not challenge you, relationships that do not value you, opportunities that do not grow you. You settle because drifting dulls your sensitivity. You stop recognizing the difference between being busy and being purposeful. You stop noticing that what you're doing is draining you instead of developing you. You stop questioning why you feel restless, and you simply call it normal. But God never designed you for normal. He designed you for purposeful movement. Realignment is the moment God interrupts the drift and calls you back to intention. Realignment begins with clarity. Clarity that pierces through confusion. Clarity that cuts ties with distraction. Clarity that exposes what no longer belongs in your life. God realigns you by removing the voices that kept you off course, by closing the door that kept you stuck, by unsettling the places where you got too comfortable. Realignment often feels like disruption at first. You feel the shaking. You feel the shift. You feel the discomfort of leaving behind what became familiar, even when it was unhealthy. But every divine realignment begins with a holy disturbance. It is God refusing to let you remain in places that cannot hold your future. There are seasons when what you call loss is actually realignment. You think you lost a person, a job, an opportunity, a community, a version of yourself. But heaven calls it repositioning. Heaven calls it correction. Heaven calls it rescue. There are times when God has to break your grip on what you thought you needed so he can place you where you were meant to be. Realignment is God's way of saving you from roads that lead to dead ends. Realignment is God's way of redirecting your steps before you waste more years walking in circles around a mountain you were never meant to climb. Realignment requires honesty with yourself about where you drifted and why. Somewhere along the way, you stopped listening to the part of you that knew you were meant for more. You ignored the restlessness that was trying to get your attention. You silenced the conviction that whispered, "This is not your path." You dismissed the inner pull because the outer world applauded your surface success. But purpose does not bow to applause. Purpose does not shrink to keep the peace. Purpose does not let you pretend forever. Eventually, purpose demands your attention again. And when God realigns you, he makes it impossible to ignore that demand. On January 23rd, when God speaks about realignment, he is addressing every silent compromise you made. Every moment you watered down your vision to make it fit someone else's expectation. Every dream you delayed because you convinced yourself you weren't qualified. Every step you hesitated to take because fear disguised itself as logic. Every time you traded purpose for comfort. Realignment is the moment God says, "No more Shri and King. No more drifting. No more pretending you don't hear me. I am calling you back." Realignment is not just about direction. It is about identity. When you drift from purpose, you drift from who you truly are. You begin living through versions of yourself created to protect you, versions created to please others, versions created to survive seasons of struggle. But those versions cannot carry the weight of your destiny. Realignment is God removing the layers that life forced on you, the layers of fear, disappointment, insecurity, bitterness, perfectionism, and self-doubt. He strips those layers not to expose your weakness, but to reveal your original strength. Realignment reconnects you with the boldness you used to have, the fire you used to carry, the clarity you used to walk with, the conviction that once made you unstoppable, the passion that once pushed you into unfamiliar territory. You remember the version of yourself who believed impossible things were possible. You remember the version of yourself who didn't apologize for dreaming big. Realignment brings that version of you back to life. Not the naive version, no, the matured version. The version forged through storms, refined through disappointments, strengthened through trials. Realignment doesn't bring you back to who you were before the drift. It brings you back stronger, wiser, and more intentional. God realigns you by reawakening your sensitivity to his voice. There was a time when you heard his guidance clearly, you recognized his direction instantly, but drifting dulls discernment. You begin to rely on your own understanding, your own logic, your own convenience. Realignment restores your ability to sense what is right even when it is uncomfortable, to sense what is wrong even when it looks appealing, to sense what is temporary even when it feels secure. Realignment sharpens your spiritual instinct so that you can recognize alignment, not by appearance but by truth. Realignment also requires pruning. God removes what could interfere with your trajectory. He cuts away relationships that drain your energy. He closes opportunities that would distract you. He shifts environments that stifle your growth. Pruning feels painful because you focus on what's being cut, but heaven is focused on what is being made possible. Every pruning is preparation. Every removal is room. Every ending is an introduction to a better alignment. When God realigns you, He will not allow anything or anyone to keep you from reaching the place you were meant to step into. Realignment brings you face to face with the purpose you abandoned. Some of the things you walked away from were never meant to be left behind. Some gifts you stopped using were never meant to expire. Some dreams you ignored were never meant to go silent. You didn't stop wanting them, you just stopped believing they were possible. But purpose doesn't disappear because of doubt. It waits for faith to return. And faith returns when God realigns you. Suddenly, the dream that intimidated you becomes the dream that energizes you. The calling that once scared you becomes the calling that focuses you. The assignment you once resisted becomes the assignment you cannot ignore. Realignment means God is restoring your direction, but He is also restoring your discipline. Purpose is not fulfilled by feelings, but by consistency. Drifting often leads to disorder in your habits, disorder in your priorities, disorder in your goals. Realignment brings order back into your life. You begin to organize your time differently, choose your relationships differently, invest your energy differently. You stop chasing everything and start pursuing only what aligns with your destiny. You stop scattering your attention and start focusing on what matters. Realignment simplifies your life in a way that increases your power. Realignment also restores your motivation. Drifting drains motivation because you are always out of place. You are working, but you are not fulfilled. You are moving, but you are not progressing. You are busy, but you are not growing. But once God realigns you, motivation returns with force. Suddenly you wake up with purpose again. Your steps feel intentional again. Your spirit feels alive again. You feel a sense of urgency, not panic, but purpose. You feel like you're catching up to the version of yourself you always knew you were meant to be. Realignment requires courage. Courage to walk away from things that no longer align. Courage to embrace the unknown. Courage to start again. Courage to admit you drifted. Courage to trust God's new direction, even when it contradicts your past choices. Courage to let go of what feels safe but isn't right. Courage to step into what feels risky but is divine. Realignment calls you to stand in the tension between who you were and who you are, becoming, and choose growth over comfort. Realignment also restores your vision. Vision is not just the ability to see the future, it is the ability to recognize the steps that lead you there. When you drift, your vision becomes cloudy. You lose the ability to imagine. You lose the ability to expect. You stop looking forward and start looking backward. But realignment flips your gaze. Suddenly you see possibilities again. You see paths again. You see opportunities again. You see yourself differently. Realignment reshapes your identity until you can recognize the version of yourself God sees. Realignment brings divine timing back into your life. When you drift, you miss moments